What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and it is finally time to talk about Star Wars Outlaws, the latest Star Wars video game. I actually pre-ordered the game. I paid for the $120 deluxe edition, which I know some of you are already thinking, why would you do that? But it's a Star Wars game, and before we get too far into this review, I do want to kind of open up my thoughts on video games in general. I don't cover a whole lot here on the channel, as this is predominantly a channel about movies and TV, but I've been gaming since the 90s. I've been playing video games consistently on a daily basis since I was a young kid. I would say on a weekly basis, I put at least a couple dozen hours into gaming, depending on how busy my workload is for the week in terms of my day job, or spending time with family or friends, my wife, whatever the case may be. So it all varies, but I do game pretty heavily, and when I was younger, I used to game all the time, just full-on days and just long nights of playing games. But it's something that's always been a big part of my life, and I feel like I should mention that since, again, I don't really talk about it here on the channel. I've had a lot of people ask me in the past, why don't you do gaming content on the channel? Well, for me, it's like doing YouTube content in general can feel like work sometimes, and when it comes to gaming, I like to just kind of make it something that I do for fun. So when it comes down to specific games, though, I want to cover them. And so when it comes down to Star Wars releases, as you guys just know that Star Wars is my favorite thing of all time, not just the movies, not just the shows, not just the books, just the whole thing. I'm always excited to talk about a new Star Wars game. And when it comes down to games and what I pay for nowadays, typically I wait for games to be on sale. I'm that kind of person. I think we all are in this world. Games don't really hold that much value these days. But in the case of a Star Wars game, I typically always pay full price for it the second it drops, because I want to play the game as soon as it comes out. I'm always going to be curious to play it. Even if I've heard people say they didn't like it, or other people say they loved it, whatever the case may be, I'm always going to want to get my personal hands on it and try it for myself. So I paid for the game outright. And again, I don't typically pay for games at launch anymore, especially since I play on Xbox. So I have Game Pass, and there's just an opportunity to play a lot of games without having to spend a whole lot of money. So yeah, Star Wars Outlaws, the game came out about 2 weeks ago at this point. I got to play it a couple of days early thanks to the pre-order allowing early access into the game, and I'm about 50 hours into the game in terms of gameplay. I've completed the campaign, all of the side quests, and all of the intels. I've collected all the collectibles, and have like about 4 or 5 achievements left to get in the game. Now, this is a game that's been getting a lot of controversy, though, as I think most Star Wars things do nowadays, but in the gaming world, something that we've seen happen time in and time out is, unfortunately, so many games that are launching that end up being incredibly buggy, or just clearly seem like they weren't ready to be released. Maybe they had a deadline they had to meet, so they put the game out, and then they end up patching it over the course of months or years. And so this is something that we even saw with the last Star Wars game, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which I heard was a buggy mess on the PC. I played it on the Xbox Series X. Similar to this game, I played this whole game through the Xbox Series X, and I didn't have any issues with glitches when it came down to Jedi Survivor. Now, when it comes down to Star Wars Outlaws, I did find myself running into a handful of glitches, and we're going to get into those in just a little bit. But when I started seeing all the videos of people getting launched into space, or stormtroopers just clearly missing them, enemies like not shooting at them whatsoever, people falling through the ground, or all kinds of other weird glitches that were game breaking or game ruining, as many claimed, I was curious to see if I was going to have the same experience. And I'll start this off by saying I didn't really have too many glitches in this game. I had a handful, but it wasn't really anything that was ever crazy. I know people were talking about the game crashing. I would say across the entire 50 hours that I played this game, the game only crashed maybe 3 or 4 times, and at one point it crashed twice within a small window of time. So I just reset my Xbox, turned it back on, and everything was just fine. It never happened again. So that wasn't really an issue I personally had. There were a couple of moments here and there visually where it seemed like the textures weren't fully loading in, whether it be the characters' hairs or plants around the planet. Also a couple of moments in certain cutscenes where it seemed the frame rates were dropping in a couple of moments. Again, nothing that was game ruining, nothing that made me want to go home and cry about it, but something that, was at least worth mentioning here for sure. I also had a couple of moments where I was able to park my speeder in a couple of strange spots that it should not have been able to sit in, and a couple of moments where I saw some of the random NPC characters hit a quick T-pose. And if you know what a T-pose is, it's when the characters reach their arms out and clearly they're just in more of their model position, and then they would like kind of quickly move back into like active mode. And so there was a couple of moments like that. And I've always been a long time gamer that loves glitches in some ways, like as long as it doesn't ruin the game for me. If I find something weird happening or a glitch happening, I always find a little bit of fun to be had there. And so I figured I'd talk about the glitches right off the top here with this review, because it's something that a lot of people have been dogging on this game for. It's something that people have been saying this game is a scam for, that it's a disaster, that it's horrible, that you shouldn't spend your money, that Ubisoft and Lucasfilm Games just absolutely put out a piece of crap here, and it's like the worst Star Wars game that's ever been made, and it's just not true. And I've spoken to a lot of other friends who have played through this game on PS5 and on Xbox Series X as well, who have said they've had minimal glitches and have been really enjoying the game. And as I was looking up things online, maybe if there was areas that I was kind of stuck in or I couldn't find a specific intel, you know, I'd look a couple things up online on Reddit or something like that, and there was plenty of people who clearly were playing the game and having a good time with it. Now, there are frustrating elements. I've already touched on some of those, you know, gripes I had in terms of some of the glitches, and we're going to get into all of that. But before we do that, let's talk about what the base premise of this game is about. This is the first open world Star Wars game, and the closest we've ever gotten to an open world Star Wars game before this was Star Wars Jedi Survivor, that came out, I believe, a little over a year ago at this point. I played through that game, covered it here on the channel, completed it 100%, all the achievements within like 3 or 4 days. But I would say that the two Jedi games, Fallen Order and Survivor, are far more Metroidvania style games, with Survivor having some open world elements for sure, but not necessarily being fully open world. When it comes down to Star Wars Outlaws, you get to explore 4 different planets over the course of the game, some of which are a little bit more limited in what you can explore, and a couple of them are far more open. Those 4 planets are the planets of Toshara, that was introduced into this game. You also have Akiva, that's been introduced and spoken about in the books. You have Tatooine, that I think we all know and love at this point, as well as Kijimi, that was introduced in the sequel trilogy. And so it was nice to be able to explore those planets. Kijimi was the one that you can't really explore much of. It's just more of a town, a hub that you get to kind of explore. There's open world elements there, but it's not as open as something like Tatooine, Toshara, and Akiva, where they have hub little cities and towns, but they actually do have an open planet that you can explore, and various caves, tunnels, and buildings that you can go and have a good time in. And when it came down to the exploration part of this world, that was what I enjoyed the most. When it comes down to an open world Star Wars game, this is exactly what I wanted in a lot of ways. Now, with that said, if you're not a fan of the familiar kind of format of an Ubisoft open world game, whether it be something like Far Cry, something like the Ghost Recon games, something like Assassin's Creed, then you're not going to enjoy this, because in a lot of ways, this is similar to those games where you have an open world map, you have a bunch of different places that you can explore, there's going to be a bunch of random side characters and NPCs that are going to call you over to go and save somebody for them or go collect something for them. You know, in the case of this world, you're in the seedy underground of the Star Wars universe, so you are working with bounty hunters and various individuals who are part of the crime syndicates, and so you're going to have all these people kind of sending you out to do different things. You're going to come across question marks on the map that you can, you know, approach, and you're going to be able to raid camps and collect treasure. So in a lot of ways, it is very, you know, similar to those other Ubisoft releases that I mentioned, as far as how the open world looks and feels and what you're able to do in that open world. So yeah, again, if you're not a fan of Ubisoft games, and I've heard many people say they aren't, then this isn't your kind of game. But for me, I don't necessarily need every Star Wars game to be new and fresh and add a completely new dynamic to gaming. It's nice to be able to have Star Wars just implemented into a familiar game style. And as somebody who actually in the last few years caught up on a couple of Assassin's Creed that I hadn't played, like, you know, Origins and Valhalla and Odyssey, Mirage, or games like Far Cry 6 just a couple of months ago, I am a fan of Ubisoft games. They're not necessarily my favorite open world games of all time. It all depends on the installment, but yeah, you know, they're a good fun time. They're a checklist open world game where you have an open world map that has tons of little things to do and kind of check off boxes of completing certain tasks. They're nice to kind of shut your brain off and kind of explore the world and just enjoy it. And that's exactly what I want gaming to be. And so this is exactly what this is when it comes down to the Star Wars game. So let's talk a little bit more about what the story is all about. I was going to say that a moment ago, but then I got a little bit into some of the world. The game opens up and we're introduced to the character of Kay Vess, who is played by Humberly Gonzalez. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. She grew up on Canto Bight, which is the casino planet that you can see in Star Wars The Last Jedi, and she has a little companion, a little creature known as Nix, played by D. Bradley Baker, who most people will know as the clones in all of the animated Star Wars shows, but he's also played tons of other characters across all of those animated shows. And the two of them find themselves on a mission to go and rob a vault of the villain of this game, Sliro Barsha, played by Cowlin Byrne. And they end up finding themselves double-crossed in all this, end up finding themselves in the crosshair of Zarek Besh, which is a group that works under Sliro. He's part of the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau. And yeah, now they're on the run from Zarek Besh. Not too long into the game, they end up coming across the character of Jalen Vrax, played by Eric Johnson, as well as a droid known as ND5, played by Jay Rincon. And so now Kves and Nyx are working alongside ND5 and Jalen to try to put together a team so they can go back and try to rob that vault of Scleros once again. And over the course of the game, you come across a slew of other characters who will end up helping you in that final heist at the end of the game. The game is jam-packed with a bunch of cameos as well from popular characters. And then one of the main things about this game is how you are working with the syndicates to get a lot of things done here. For anybody not super familiar with the underground parts of Star Wars, the seedy villain crime world, there are tons of syndicates in the world of Star Wars. We've seen a lot of these introduced in the films, as well as predominantly in a lot of the books, comics, and some of the animated series. The 4 different crime syndicates that you will work alongside in this game, or work for, or work against, are the Pike Syndicate, the Hutts, Crimson Dawn, and the Ashiga clan. All of these have their own reputation bar in the game, and you can get yourself to be at a very good reputation with them, as well as a very low reputation with them. For the sake of certain achievements and just unlocking certain things, I was able to get all of these reputation bars to the top, and at least one of them for the Hutts to the very lowest I possibly could, so I can unlock that achievement. And over the course of the game, you'll have tons of opportunities in the story or in certain missions where you can either work alongside a syndicate to up your reputation with them, or double cross them in order to up your reputation with another syndicate. It was an interesting, fun dynamic to this game that allowed you to, you know, kind of work to stay in the good graces of these various individuals and these various syndicates. And, you know, you kind of had to kind of play a balancing game. I found myself able to, you know, work my way up with pretty much all of them and keep a consistent good reputation with all of them through the contracts that you can also do in the game that are essentially side missions that allow you to do specific quests for these individual syndicates, so you can kind of boost your reputation. Between those and the main missions throughout the course of the game, I was able to kind of balance out my reputation with all of these individuals. But part of what made it fun was the fact that, you know, every decision you make would kind of harm your reputation with one syndicate while it would better your reputation with another. Some people might find that to be a little bit frustrating over the course of the game, but I thought it was a cool dynamic here, and I think it added something new and fresh to a game like this, and it made me feel like I was part of that Star Wars world. And when it comes down to feeling like part of that Star Wars world, I think what made this game really solid for me was just exploring. The story was enjoyable. I'll say here my review for the story. I thought it was an enjoyable time. There's heart to be had. I enjoyed the character of Kves. I enjoyed her relationship with her little pet Nyx. Their rapport together I thought was super cute. ND5 was one of the coolest characters in the game. While he doesn't have an abundance to do, there are some small, really great character moments that slowly build up to the end that I think is probably a really great finale when it comes down to the character of Kves and ND5. I found the relationship between those two characters to be pretty solid. When it comes down to a lot of the other side characters like Jalen Vrax, like I mentioned, I found him to just be okay. He doesn't really have an abundance to do until the end, and they kind of reveal something big about his character. And then some of the other characters that you come across in the game, characters like Vale, Ankh, or Gadik, all enjoyable enough characters, but not characters I ever found myself super in love with. I don't necessarily feel like it's worth comparing them because they're super different, but when I look at the crew of characters that you follow in the Jedi games that recently came out, I found myself way more invested in those characters and that kind of family-like dynamic that they kind of have in those games versus the characters here. I never found myself as connected to the whole crew as a family unit, but when it comes down to specific characters, most notably Kves, Nyx, and ND5, I found myself really enjoying that. But when it comes down to exploring the world, like I was mentioning, I think that that's where this game really shines. I found myself really invested in just exploring the world. Again, it's not a game that, if you play a lot of games, is reinventing the wheel. If you're somebody like me who's played pretty much every Ubisoft release, you're going to feel that familiarity of a game you've already played before, just with the Star Wars overlay. And for me, that's okay. I didn't necessarily, again, need this game to be completely brand new from the ground up. I saw some people complaining that they would have preferred an open world lightsaber wielding game, a Jedi game, or a Sith game. And don't get me wrong, if we got that, I'd be absolutely fucking awesome and excited about that. But when it comes down to this game as we got it, I like the idea of having this Outlaws kind of crime syndicate game where you kind of have to work alongside alongside the crime syndicates. You have all these fun cameos throughout it, and something where you can hop on your speeder and explore the world, come across these various caves. And when it came down to one thing that I had a little bit of a gripe with when it came down to exploring the world, is that when I heard that Ubisoft was going to be releasing this game, I didn't necessarily expect or want full-on free running. But for the publisher that is well known for releasing Assassin's Creed, and is really well known for creating these worlds where you can scale the walls and kind of explore things however you want to, I was hoping this game would have a little bit more of that. But similar to Jedi Survivor, it's a little bit more linear in terms of where you can climb and how you can kind of scale buildings, where you have to look for specific things you can climb on. That was a little bit of a bummer for me, knowing who released this game. I was hoping there was going to be a little bit more of a full-on climbing ability in the game. I feel like that would have added so much more to the exploration of this game. However, with that said, even though it was pretty simple platforming and climbing when it came down to the exploration of certain areas, I found myself really invested in those sections. I was having a lot of fun when there was no enemies and I was able to just kind of roam around. And as a big Star Wars fan, being able to live in that world is something that I just love being able to do. So whenever I get to play a Star Wars game, whether I love it or don't, I just like being able to be in that world. And I see a lot of people dogging on this game for its graphics. And while I can agree that the graphics aren't, the top tier of the modern day, what's possible in the world of gaming, and I would even say that it's probably not as good in terms of graphics as the last release, Jedi Survivor, by no means does this game look like crap. People are acting like this game is complete garbage and that it looks trashy. Again, I have seen some videos of certain people's like frame rates and certain people's like graphics kind of getting all glitchy, so I'm not going to take away from people's personal experiences if they had those bad experiences on PC or some other platform. But for me, it looked like the game ran perfectly fine outside of a couple of moments. The graphics look totally fine. Of course, there are moments where it cuts to a cut scene that has way better graphics than the actual gameplay graphics, and that's when it's the most notable. But I never found myself looking at the game thinking this is ugly. And when you're just fully exploring the world and being able to see how it's inhabited, it feels like Star Wars. It looks like Star Wars. When you get to kind of walk around and just hear the random side conversations from the stormtroopers or the random civilians that are walking around, or the thugs or the various bounty hunters that are walking around, I just love being able to kind of take in that world, and I just never found myself bored by just flat out exploring. And some of my favorite sections of the game were the sections where it had nothing to do with stealth, had nothing to do with combat, and it was just about exploring. And I think as a longtime Star Wars fan, if you're like me and you just want to explore a Star Wars world, this game has tons to explore that I think a lot of Star Wars fans are going to enjoy. Tons and tons of small Easter eggs. Even things like going to Tatooine and going to the cantina from A New Hope and being able to go over to the booth where Han Solo shot Greedo and see the blaster shot on the wall from when Han Solo dodged out of the way and Greedo missed him. It's really cool to be able to see all these tiny little details. There are so many great little Easter eggs and cameos if you are a fan of Star Wars. And as a fan of Star Wars, I found myself incredibly engaged and honestly really into how much detail was put into the game. Again, I can't deny that there are some things about it that don't necessarily feel fully polished, but I do believe the game will have plenty of time to kind of fix some of those issues. I don't know what happened on the back end, but I've watched interviews with the developers and the writers of this game and some of the actors, and everybody seems so excited to be a part of this, and that they were really trying to pack in as much detail as they can. So I don't know if there was a deadline on their end that just made them get this game out. But a good example of a game that I actually just recently played for the first time was Cyberpunk 2077, where that game came out and it just was absolutely trashed by a lot of people because of how glitchy it was. I've just now played it years after its release, and it's been patched up and tons of new stuff has been added to it, and the game played perfectly fine when I played it. And so that's not necessarily to praise modern day AAA studios for releasing games not completely finished, but all that to say that I didn't really have that many issues on Xbox Series X, and I can only imagine as the months and years pass that they're just gonna do more to patch up the little things that people are having issues with. And it seems like a lot of the people who are having issues with this game are predominantly on PC, which is unfortunate, as PC should be able to run the game way better than the console should. Now, when it comes down to the gameplay of the game, which obviously we're really long into this video, so thank you for anybody who has stuck around and is watching my 2-week later review for this game and just listen to me ramble. But when it comes down to the gameplay, it is a pretty standard third-person shooter with various gadgets that you get over the course of the game that will allow you to get in and out of certain areas. There are puzzle-like things that you'll need to do to unlock certain doors, as well as like a rhythmic kind of puzzle that you'll have to do to unlock certain chests throughout the course of the game. I spent a lot of time in this game kind of roaming around trying to get into places, only to learn I didn't have the tool or the blaster upgrade in order to get into that area. So you could probably cut a couple of hours off of my playtime in terms of what was actually pushing the game forward, because there was a lot of me just kind of roaming around and trying to find ways into places to only realize that I was wasting my time. And so when it comes down to the gameplay, yeah, it's pretty standard, you know, third-person shooter fare with a lot of stealth mechanics. One thing that this game has been highly criticized for are its forced stealth areas. And this is one thing that I think makes it even more abundantly clear to me that a lot of people just created their opinion on the game within the first couple hours of the game, is that one thing I can criticize this game on for sure is that the first few hours of the game does hold your hand a little bit too much, as they're trying to teach you about the world, teach you about the gameplay, teach you about the syndicates, how to kind of deal with the reputation system. Once it teaches you how to, like, you know, fly in the game and the various things you can do in these sections of the game where you'll be in a spacecraft. You know, there's all those elements that you do have to learn about the game before you get into it, but I can definitely agree with a lot of people that the game has a slow start as it holds your hand a little bit too much. And in that time that it's holding your hand, you deal with quite a few stealth areas that you can't be caught in whatsoever. If not, it'll just say caught across the screen and you'll be set back. That was wildly frustrating, I won't lie. It was a frustrating part of the first couple hours for me, but I will say that once you get past that, it doesn't really happen anymore. And by the time you're over 5 hours into the game and you're, you know, 50 hours in where I'm at, once you have a good reputation with most of these crime syndicates and stuff, you don't really deal with that kind of caught situation anymore. There are a couple of sections in the game where you can't get caught, but for the most part, it becomes a situation where if you are caught, you can fight your way out of it, and it's just going to affect your, you know, your reputation with said syndicate, or you'll have the empire coming after you. So eventually, when it comes down to the stealth, the forced part of it does kind of trickle away. That is in that early part of the game, and a lot of people really wrote on that as their main criticism, and it was clear that those people only played the first couple hours and then clearly just gave up on the game. I can understand some people saying that the first couple hours shouldn't have had that. I can agree. I think the first couple of hours were definitely a little bit too slow in terms of letting you just explore the world for yourself. You know, it does hold on to your hand a little bit too much at the beginning, but once they break free of that and you've learned everything you pretty much need to learn about the game, yeah, I found that's where it was the most exciting to get further into the game, just kind of roam around, do my own thing. And once I started to gain more abilities and do different things with Nyx over the course of time, I found that the stealth areas that were a little bit challenging at the beginning were super easy to get through. And I should also add, I played the game through on its regular difficulty. I didn't go for anything too hard or anything too easy. I just played for it on the default regular difficulty that the game sets you at right at the start. So with all that said, I think Star Wars Outlaws is a lot of fun. I found it to be an enjoyable, good time that is just, you know, a visual spectacle at times. It's not as good as other things, but there are moments where this game looks great. There are moments where, you know, exploring the world is awesome in Star Wars. This is without a doubt the biggest Star Wars game we've ever gotten. Sure, is it familiar to other Ubisoft titles? Sure, does it have a couple of glitches here and there, at least for the Xbox Series X? Are there a couple of things they clearly need to polish over? Absolutely. Is it a perfect game? No. But I love so many Star Wars games from the past that are not perfect, and maybe it's because I recently played through the remastered releases of the Battlefront games as well as Bounty Hunter, where the graphics here just didn't look as bad because I've been playing older Star Wars games. But I enjoyed the look of this game. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the story for the most part. It's not the greatest Star Wars story, but I found it to be a fun time. And when it comes down to games, the gameplay, the exploration of it, the being able to shut your mind off and just kind of be in another world is, I think, what's the most important, and that's exactly what I had here. I had a great time roaming around this world. I'm looking forward to the upcoming Hondo DLC that should be coming soon enough. And before we wrap this up, I figured I would just touch on some of the cameos here. So this is going to be a spoiler little section here at the end for anybody who does not want to hear about the cameos that appear in this game. Of course, some of these aren't, I guess, cameos, but are just characters I figured were cool to mention in case you aren't familiar. Obviously, you work with the Hutts and Crimson Dawn, so with that, you get to see Jabba the Hutt, Bib Fortuna, as well as characters like qi'ra from Solo: A Star Wars Story, which was really cool to see, though Emilia Clarke does not come back to play the character, but it's made to look like her. Outside of them, you do get to come across some big names in Star Wars that, of course, most of us really love, with the biggest one coming at the very end, which is Darth Vader. It was really cool to see him, really enjoyed seeing him at the very end of the game, as well as characters like Boba Fett that you can briefly see, characters like Lando that you'll eventually come across, and being able to see Han and Carbonite. So that's going to be my thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws. I'm looking forward to hearing all of your guys' thoughts thoughts down below. Have you played the game? Have you not played the game? I'll just say this too, if you made it this far into the video and you're torn on playing this game, and a lot of people have told you it's trash, maybe you've seen a couple of clips of it looking broken and you just don't feel like you want to waste your own money on it, then maybe wait for a sale. But what I will say is that if you're a Star Wars fan who's on the fence, who just says, ah man, it looked so good, I want to play it. I played 50 hours of the game. I beat the game, I played through the campaign, I played through all the side missions. The game is playable. It's not this broken scam of a mess that people are claiming it to be. I think a lot of people are being wildly dramatic about this game online. If you are having a bad experience on your personal platform, or you don't care about Star Wars enough to push yourself through some of those glitches, that's okay. For me, again, I didn't really face too many of those glitches. I found it to be a good, fun time. I was able to get through everything and enjoy myself, and outside of a couple of moments here or there where I could have gripes about it, I ultimately was very, very pleased with this game, and I think it's getting way, way more hate than it deserves. Should you buy the $120 version that I did? Probably not. I don't know if that was worth it, but paying for it at full price, I don't think you're gonna get, shafted in terms of, what the game's worth to you. I think there's plenty of fun to be had here, but if you're hearing all this and you do want to wait just a little bit for them to clean up some of these elements and add patches, they have already said they're going to be working on that within the next couple of weeks. So it's possible in the next few months, maybe the game will make a small little bit of a sale. You can pick it up where some of these patches have been sent out there to help update the game a little bit more. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.